I never thought I'd be the one to destroy my own sister's wedding, but sometimes the truth has its own timeline, and mine happened to coincide with the most expensive day of her life. My name is Sarah, and for 28 years, I've been the forgotten daughter in the Martinez family. You know the type, the one who gets introduced as "Oh, and this is our other daughter," after they've spent 10 minutes bragging about Jessica's latest promotion, her perfect boyfriend, now husband, and her picture-perfect life that looks like it was curated for Instagram. Jessica's wedding was supposed to be the event of the year. 300 guests, a venue that cost more than most people's houses, and a dress that could have funded a small country's education system. My parents had been planning this day since Jessica turned 16, saving every penny, taking out loans, even mortgaging their house for a second time. Because Jessica deserved nothing but the best, right? Meanwhile, I was the family disappointment. The one who chose social work over law school, who lived in a modest apartment instead of a suburban mansion, who drove a 10-year-old Honda instead of a BMW. The one who never quite measured up to their golden child. But here's the thing about being invisible: you see everything. You hear conversations not meant for your ears. You notice things others miss because they're too busy performing their perfect lives. 6 months before the wedding, I discovered something that would change everything. I was at my parents' house, helping Mom with some paperwork for the wedding vendors, when I accidentally opened the wrong folder on her computer. What I found wasn't wedding planning documents, it was a correspondence between my mother and Jessica's future mother-in-law, Patricia Whitmore. The Whitmores were old money. The kind of family that had buildings named after them and belonged to country clubs that had waiting lists longer than most college applications. Patricia had made it clear from the beginning that she wasn't thrilled about her precious son marrying into our humble family, despite the fact that Jessica had a Harvard MBA and was pulling in 6 figures at her consulting firm. But the emails I found, they revealed a different story entirely. For the past year, Patricia had been secretly funding Jessica's lifestyle. The designer clothes, the luxury vacations, the expensive dinners at restaurants with months-long waiting lists. It wasn't Jessica's success paying for her glamorous life, it was her future mother-in-law's checkbook. Patricia was essentially buying Jessica's compliance, molding her into the perfect daughter-in-law she wanted. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Patricia was getting in return. Jessica had been feeding Patricia information about our family. Every embarrassing story, every financial struggle, every private moment we'd shared. Jessica had been systematically documenting our family's shortcomings for Patricia's entertainment. The emails were filled with cruel observations about Dad's outdated wardrobe, Mom's lack of social graces, and my pathetic career choice. One email particularly stood out. Patricia had written, "Don't worry, darling. Once you're officially part of our family, you won't have to pretend to care about these people anymore. We'll make sure you have everything you need to maintain proper distance." Jessica's response? "I can't wait to be done with this charade. They're so embarrassing, especially Sarah. She actually thinks she's making a difference in the world with her little social work job. It's almost cute how delusional she is." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. This was my sister. The person I'd defended countless times when people said she was self-centered. The person I'd lent money to when she was between jobs in college. The person I'd stood by when she'd made mistakes, always believing that deep down, she cared about our family. But here was the proof, in black and white, that she saw us as nothing more than an inconvenience to be tolerated until she could escape to her new life. I should have confronted her immediately. I should have shown my parents. I should have done the right thing and saved my family from the humiliation that was coming. But I didn't. Because despite everything, I still loved her. I still hoped that maybe, somehow, the sister I remembered from childhood was still in there somewhere. So I decided to wait. To give her a chance to come clean, to show some sign that she remembered where she came from and who had sacrificed for her happiness. The wedding planning continued like a military operation. My parents worked overtime to pay for their portion of the expenses. Dad picked up extra shifts at the plant, working 12-hour days despite his bad back. Mom took on a second job cleaning offices at night, her hands cracked and bleeding from the harsh chemicals. They were literally destroying their health to give Jessica the fairy tale wedding she demanded. And through it all, Jessica played the perfect daughter. She gushed about how grateful she was, how lucky she felt to have such supportive parents, how much she loved us all. She even asked me to be her maid of honor, saying no one else could possibly understand how much this day meant to her. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the wedding day approached, I found myself hoping that marriage would change her. That becoming a wife would somehow awaken the compassion I knew she used to have. That she would find a way to honor our family even as she joined a new one. But 3 days before the wedding, I discovered she had already made her choice. I was at the bridal boutique with Jessica for her final dress fitting when her phone buzzed. She asked me to check it, assuming it was one of her bridesmaids with a last-minute question. Instead, it was a text from Patricia: "Darling, I've arranged for the photographer to take minimal pictures of your family during the reception. We don't want too many unflattering images mixed in with the good ones. Also, I've seated them at table 12, near the kitchen. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say." Jessica's response, sent just minutes earlier: "Perfect. I was worried about that. Thanks for handling it. Can't wait to put this chapter behind me." That was it. That was the moment I realized my sister was gone. The person standing in that wedding dress, admiring herself in the mirror, wasn't the girl who used to build blanket forts with me and promise we'd always be best friends. She was a stranger who had traded our family's love for social status and financial security. But I still didn't say anything. Because I had a plan. The wedding day arrived with all the pageantry Jessica had dreamed of. The venue was stunning, the flowers were perfect, the weather was ideal. Everything was going according to plan. Jessica looked beautiful, radiant even, as she prepared to marry her Prince Charming and officially join the upper echelons of society. I stood beside her as her maid of honor, watching our parents in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter marry into wealth and privilege. They looked so proud, so happy, so completely unaware that they were celebrating the very moment their daughter would officially leave them behind. The ceremony was flawless. Jessica and David exchanged vows that spoke of eternal love and commitment, of building a life together based on trust and honesty. The irony was almost too much to bear. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I watched Jessica work the room like a politician. She was charming with David's family, deferential to Patricia, and dismissive of our relatives. She barely spoke to our parents, except to pose for the few photos Patricia had deemed acceptable. I watched my father, still in his too tight suit that he'd bought specially for this day, trying to make conversation with David's colleagues. I watched my mother, exhausted from months of overtime, attempting to navigate the complex social dynamics of Patricia's friends. They were trying so hard to fit in, to be worthy of their daughter's new world. And I watched Jessica pretend not to notice their struggles. That's when I knew it was time. During the reception, just as the speeches were about to begin, I approached the DJ and asked him to make a small announcement. I told him I had a surprise video presentation for the bride and groom, something very special that the family had put together. Jessica looked confused when the DJ announced the special presentation, but she smiled and nodded, assuming it was some sentimental montage of childhood photos. The lights dimmed, and the video began to play on the large screens throughout the reception hall. But it wasn't a montage of happy memories. It was a screen recording of the email correspondence between Jessica and Patricia. Every cruel comment about our family. Every disparaging remark about our father's job, our mother's appearance, my career choice. Every plan to minimize our presence in their new life. Every expression of embarrassment about where she came from. The room fell silent as the words appeared on the screen, Patricia's voice reading the emails aloud through the audio system. The text was large enough for everyone to read, the audio clear enough for everyone to hear. "Don't worry, darling. Once you're officially part of our family, you won't have to pretend to care about these people anymore. They're so embarrassing, especially Sarah. She actually thinks she's making a difference in the world with her little social work job. I can't wait to be done with this charade. We'll seat them near the kitchen. Out of sight, out of mind. The video played for exactly 3 minutes. Long enough to reveal the truth, but not long enough to be stopped before the damage was done. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Jessica stood frozen at the head table, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, pure horror. David looked like he'd been slapped. Patricia's face had gone completely white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But it was my parents' faces that broke my heart. The confusion in their eyes as they processed what they'd just heard. The slow realization that their daughter, the one they'd sacrificed everything for, had been ashamed of them all along. Then the whispers started. 300 guests, all processing what they'd just witnessed. The Whitmore's friends looked scandalized. Our relatives looked heartbroken. The wedding party looked stunned. Jessica finally found her voice. Sarah, what, how could you? But she couldn't finish the sentence. Because there was no explanation that would make this better. No justification that would undo what everyone had just learned about her true character. David stood up slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. Is this true? He asked quietly, but in the silence of the room, everyone heard him. Jessica's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Her silence was answer enough. We need to talk, David said, his voice deadly calm. Now. They disappeared into a side room, leaving 300 guests in stunned silence. The wedding party sat frozen, unsure of what to do next. The catering staff hovered uncertainly, wondering if they should continue serving dinner. But I wasn't done yet. I stood up, walked to the microphone, and looked out at the crowd of confused faces. I know what you're all thinking, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You're wondering why I would do this. Why I would destroy my own sister's wedding. And you're right to wonder, because this isn't something I did lightly. I paused, looking at my parents, who were still sitting in stunned silence. For 28 years, I've watched my parents sacrifice everything for Jessica's happiness. They took out loans they couldn't afford, worked jobs that destroyed their health, and gave up their own dreams so she could have hers. They did this because they believed their daughter's success was worth any price. My voice grew stronger as I continued. They believed that because Jessica told them she was grateful. She told them she appreciated their sacrifices. She told them she loved them and would never forget where she came from. But as you just saw, that was all a lie. I looked directly at Patricia, who was still sitting in shocked silence. Mrs. Whitmore, you think you bought my sister's loyalty with your money and your social connections. But what you actually bought was a person who was willing to betray the people who loved her most for the promise of a better life. If she'll do that to the family that raised her, what makes you think she won't do it to you when something better comes along? A murmur ran through the crowd. I could see people nodding, processing the implications of what I was saying. And to everyone else who's here today, I want you to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about jealousy or sibling rivalry. This is about truth. Because my parents deserve to know who their daughter really was before they spent the rest of their lives wondering why she never called, why she never visited, why she was always too busy for the people who gave her everything. I looked back at my parents, who were both crying now. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry you had to learn this way. I'm sorry I couldn't find a gentler way to show you who Jessica had become. But I couldn't stand by and watch you blame yourselves when she inevitably cut you out of her life. I couldn't let you spend years wondering what you did wrong when the truth is, you did everything right. You just raised a daughter who forgot that love isn't something you can buy or trade or upgrade. I set the microphone down and walked over to my parents. My father stood up slowly, his face weathered and tired, and pulled me into a hug. You did the right thing, sweetheart, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It hurts, but, you did the right thing. My mother joined the embrace, and for a moment, we stood there together while 300 wedding guests watched in silence. That's when Jessica and David returned to the reception hall. David's face was stone cold. Jessica's was streaked with tears and mascara. They walked to the head table, and David took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice controlled but clearly furious, "I'm afraid the celebration is over. Due to circumstances that have come to light, Jessica and I will not be continuing with the reception. Thank you for coming, and please enjoy the rest of your evening." He set the microphone down and walked out of the hall without another word, leaving Jessica standing alone at the head table in her $10,000 dress. The guests began to file out, some stopping to speak to my parents, others hurrying away to avoid the drama. The Whitmores left immediately, Patricia's face a mask of controlled humiliation. Jessica finally approached us, her perfect makeup ruined, her fairy tale wedding in shambles. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice venomous. "You've destroyed everything." "No," I replied calmly. "I just showed everyone who you really are. You destroyed this yourself the moment you decided our family wasn't good enough for your new life." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out if there was a way to salvage this situation. But there wasn't. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. "I never want to see you again," she said finally. "I figured as much," I replied. "That was always the plan, wasn't it?" She turned and walked away, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a shroud. My parents and I left the reception hall together, walking out into the cool evening air. The venue was still beautiful, the flowers still perfect, the fairy lights still twinkling. But the fairy tale was over. "What happens now?" my mother asked, her voice small and tired. "Now we go home," I said. "And we remember that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about love and loyalty and standing by each other even when it's hard. We still have that, even if Jessica doesn't." The next few weeks were difficult. The story of the ruined wedding spread through our social circle and beyond. Some people criticized me for my methods, saying I should have handled it privately. Others praised me for standing up for my parents. Most people were just fascinated by the drama of it all. Jessica and David's marriage was annulled within a month. Apparently, the revelation of her character was just the tip of the iceberg. David's family conducted their own investigation and discovered that Jessica had been embellishing her professional accomplishments, exaggerating her salary, and even lying about her educational background. The perfect daughter-in-law Patricia thought she was buying turned out to be a complete fabrication. Jessica left town shortly after the annulment, claiming she needed a fresh start. She moved to another state, blocked all of us on social media, and hasn't been in contact since. My parents were heartbroken at first, but as time passed, they began to realize that the daughter they mourned had been gone long before that wedding day. The money they'd spent on the wedding was gone, of course. The vendors had already been paid, the venue deposit was non-refundable, and the catering company kept their payment despite the early end to the reception. My parents had to refinance their mortgage again and will probably be paying off the debt for years to come. But here's what surprised me, they weren't bitter about it. They were relieved. "At least now we know," my father said a few months later as we sat on their back porch, watching the sunset. "We're not wondering why she doesn't call. We're not making excuses for why she's too busy to visit. We know where we stand." My mother nodded, sipping her tea. "It's better to know the truth than to live in a lie," she said. "Even when the truth hurts." They were right, of course. The truth did hurt. But it also set us free. Free from the exhausting effort of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who didn't value us. Free from the constant worry about why we weren't good enough for Jessica's new life. Free from the guilt of not being able to meet her ever-escalating expectations. As for me, I learned something important about family loyalty. It's not about keeping secrets or protecting people from uncomfortable truths. It's about standing up for the people who truly love you, even when it costs you everything. I lost a sister that day, but I gained something more valuable, the certainty that the family I have left is real, honest, and worth fighting for. 6 months after the wedding, I got a promotion at work. I was offered a position supervising a team of social workers, with a significant increase in salary and responsibility. It wasn't Harvard MBA money, but it was enough to help my parents with their mortgage payments and maybe even take them on a vacation they'd been dreaming about for years. When I told them the news, my father smiled and said, "I always knew you were the successful one, sweetheart. You just measure success differently than your sister did." He was right. Jessica measured success in dollars and social status. I measured it in the number of lives I could touch, the families I could help, the difference I could make in my community. And by that measure, I was already richer than she'd ever be. The wedding venue where Jessica's fairy tale fell apart is still in business, still hosting beautiful celebrations for couples who truly love each other. Sometimes I drive by it and remember that night, not with regret, but with a quiet satisfaction that I did what needed to be done. Because sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it destroys everything everyone thought they knew. Especially then. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for what's right, I'd love to hear your story. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that prove who we really are. Drop a comment below and share your experience, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the complicated truth of family relationships.